Mhm.
All right, Wes, Lindsay, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Renee. Well,
You're welcome.
as Renee said, my name is Wes Erickson. I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Hendrick Health here in Abilene, Texas. I'm originally from London, England. My parents were missionaries, and I moved to Abilene in 2016 to begin my Masters of Divinity at ACU. I won't go into the whole story of my chaplaincy journey, but I kind of fell into it. There might be some other chaplains who can relate to that. I never thought it would be my career path, but the moment I started visiting patients here at Hendrick Health, I found that this was my calling. And so it's been a sweet journey, um, a journey that took me through CPE over a couple of years. And starting last fall, I took the director position here at Hendrick Health. And so I'll now offer it over to Lindsay to introduce herself.
Wonderful. Well, my name is Lindsay Guerrero. I am the chaplain coordinator here at Hendrick in Abilene. We'll talk about this a little more, but we're a multi-campus medical center. So I have the joy of overseeing the chaplains at one of our campuses. Originally from San Diego, California, and I've been a chaplain since 2006. Spent the majority of my career before I came here working in pediatric palliative care and pediatric hospice. Then I fell in love with a boy from Texas, and here I am. So I moved to Texas in 2020 and have been here at Hendrick in this role since 2022. I was board certified in 2014, and yeah, it's been a fun road, and it's lovely to get to be here and talk to our chaplain colleagues.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I'll just share our screen here and we'll get this presentation started. Renee, let me know if that comes out okay.
I see it, Wes.
Yeah,
So
Okay,
that looks good.
okay,
yeah,
perfect. So our conversation for today is titled Speaking Their Language, Spiritual Care and Organizational Goals in Healthcare. And as we mentioned in our introduction, both Lindsay and I are relatively new to Hendrick Health. We've both been very blessed to come from diverse chaplaincy experiences. I know we both have hospice experiences. Lindsay has pediatric experiences. I did my residency training for CPE at a level one trauma center in Maryland. Um, and coming to this position in leadership, one of the goals that we had was to grow our department from a more traditional standing into what researchers call a transitional department, eventually for the goal to get to a professional spiritual care department. And so one of the ways to go along that journey from traditional to transitional to professional is to have a better understanding of your organizational goals. Now, I know when I did my CPE education, organizational goals did not come up a lot. We spent a lot of time on looking at chaplain identity, authority, pastoral voice, developing plans of care, developing good practices with documentation, but not so much exposure to organizational goals and what that looks like day to day for a chaplain to be aware of your organizational goals. And so that's been something that me and Lindsay have focused on, particularly over the last 8 to 9 months. And so this presentation came at the right time for us to reevaluate where we stand with our organizational goals. Do we have alignment with them? What are our relationship with key stakeholders in the healthcare system? And then how can we always improve the quality of patient visits and our relationships with the local community? Um, so what is speaking their language? What do we mean by that? So really speaking their language relates to organizational fluency. It relates to having a comprehensive understanding of the company's goals, values, and strategy in day-to-day operations. Um, the way in which a chaplain enters their work for the longest time, at least to me, always seemed very isolated. I felt like a lone ranger a lot of the time. Like, okay, I have my patient list. I'm now going to go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus and serve patients along the way. The more and more I got to understand the organizational goals and values and strategy, the more I was able to integrate all my clinical units. And the benefit of that was is that I was now connecting the patient's um, plan of care or their current healthcare journey with other areas of the hospital. I was able to connect their spiritual issues with nursing, with the physician, with social work, with case management. And that allowed me to have a better understanding of how I could then contribute to their healthcare journey. So that's on a personal level. On a department level, the more integrated a chaplaincy department can be, the better fluency there is from the top right the way to the bottom in a patient's journey through healthcare. So there's three points I want to refer to here on what it means to speak their language. The first is alignment. And so alignment with the company's overall vision and strategy, creating a unified direction. The second is transparency, which fosters trust and support from leadership. And the third is accountability internally within a pastoral care department and externally with those you're working with for greater outcomes and quality of care. And so again, these are points that just never came up in my chaplaincy training. We were not trained to have a greater understanding of the organizational goals, values, and beliefs. And I believe that chaplaincy is currently at a place where we're still trying to work out really who we are on a maybe national level, or to find a consensus of what it is that a chaplain provides to a hospital, what it is it provides to a particular clinical site, what does it provide to an organization. And I still think there's work to be done in that area. But what we hope to show today is that if we come from the other angle of actually beginning with the organizational goals and having alignment with them, building that transparency between a spiritual care department and an organization, and in fostering accountability between the two, we can actually have a better sense of what it is we do day to day as chaplains and what we can provide as a spiritual care department, while we still do the work of, having better clarity about what chaplains do and how our role and function operates day to day at a hospital. So there are two concerns that come out when chaplains struggle to speak the language of administration or organizational goals. The first is that sometimes we can be tongue-tied. You can ask or you can survey a group of chaplains, and you will probably get a different explanation on what their role and function is on a day-to-day basis. And maybe it's an understanding that comes from their denomination, their background, their training. Maybe it's just the direction that they've been given from their spiritual care leadership team. There's just a lot of diversity within the realm of chaplains about what we do day to day. And when we are asked to give a, not defense for what we do, but just simply like, so what is the role of a chaplain? There's a strong likelihood that you're going to get a variety of answers. And that can sometimes be problematic for when we have to have conversations with key stakeholders on what we're doing, and then give justification for our place, our role, and our function. The second one, and the one that we'll really be focused on today, is, again, this, we're almost lost in translation between this is the work that we're doing and this is the ways in which we're contributing to organizational goals, but sometimes that doesn't always translate to what the organization is really concerned with. And so when I speak to fellow chaplains and those who have gone through CPE training, we have an understanding of what we're doing day to day. But sometimes when we try to translate that to other people outside of our discipline, there's sometimes a break in that communication. And so, again, if we can have a better alignment with the organization side and better understand where they're coming from, I think that will help bridge the gap between the two sides, where we can then collaborate together and have that alignment towards providing better patient care and outcomes. So this graph right here is helpful for when we first started this journey. A lot of times when you look at graphs, you'll see organizational culture at the top. And so I wanted to flip that and actually say, well, from the bottom, if we just had an understanding of what the culture and the goals and the practices of the organization are, we can then build better opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration. And then that ultimately leads towards better holistic care. So our first approach is just getting better awareness and better alignment with the organizational culture. What is it that the organization wants to achieve on a day-to-day basis? What are their goals for the next 3 to 5 years? What are their goals for the next 10 years? And what are the ways in which chaplains can then be embedded in with those goals within their institution? Through being embedded in your organization, you will then have better opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration. Through that interdisciplinary collaboration with nurses, social work, physicians, we will then deliver a more holistic approach to our patients and our community. The metaphor that I have personally like to use is often seeing the hospital as a cathedral or as a large church, where chaplains are, in a way, that spiritual leadership, and we are like the priests and the pastors of a church. And the congregation is not the patients. The congregation is actually the people that we work with each and every day. They're the ones that we are ministering to and the ones that we're pouring into. The guests and the people who visit our church are actually the patients. And so if, as a pastor and a priest, if we were just taking care of the guests and not our congregation, I think there's a gap in how we're delivering good, high quality patient care. But that begins with first knowing the culture of our congregation, knowing the culture of the people that we work with day in, day out, so that collectively we can all collaborate and deliver a more holistic approach when our guests and patients arrive to our campuses. So I want to just provide some context on how we got to where we are today as I see it across spiritual care. I'm pulling from research from a sociologist called Wendy Catch. She wrote a very influential book called Paging God, Religion and the Halls of Medicine. And she kind of delineates the history of chaplaincy over the last 100 years. And so I've broken it down into 4 sections here. We have the emergence of CPE chaplains from 1925 to 1950, slow religious diversification from 1950 to 1975, rising spirituality in healthcare movement from 1975 to 2000, and then we have the present day context where there's this push to make healthcare whole. The emergence of CP chaplaincy in the first point here is very interesting to me, and there are 3 characters that I want to highlight. The first is Richard Cabot, who was a chaplain at Mass General, and he was the first one who believed in the CPE model. He titled a research paper called A Year of Theological Training, where they would receive theological students who would then engage a clinical context. It was through that training program that he met a name that we're probably familiar with is Antoine Boyson, and he's the one that came up with the Living Human document. He was geared more towards psychiatry, and Richard Cabot was the one who actually said, no, we need to make this more expansive and not just focus on psychiatry, but actually focus on the whole healthcare system. How is it that chaplains can work with physicians, social workers, and also nursing? Small point, Richard Cabot is considered the father of clinical social work. And so his whole approach to chaplaincy was finding ways in which they can work and collaborate more with other disciplines. That leads to a third character called Russell Dix, who wrote a very influential paper called The Work of a Chaplain in a General Hospital. And he gave 4 points for what a chaplain should be doing in 1939. His first point was that a chaplain should be interdisciplinary. They should be able to deliver a plan of care. They should be accountable to hospital administration, and they should be very well versed in documentation. So those 4 points of being interdisciplinary, having a plan of care, being accountable, and documentation are all things that chaplains today are taught and trained to do. And yet this was conversations that chaplains were having almost 80 years ago. So from the very beginning, there's been this general consensus of what a chaplain should be aware of day to day and how they can be integrated within a healthcare organization. But as we'll see over the next few points, we still haven't quite found that consensus across the national standards for chaplaincy. So the second point, in 1950 to 1975, there was slow religious diversification, which was a good thing in the sense that chaplaincy was now being introduced to a lot of different religious movements and religious plans of care. The issue that came up for chaplains during this period is that a lot of the different denominations within Christianity or other religions almost became monolithic. We started to see that there was the American Protestant Chaplain Association. Then we had the National Association of Catholic Chaplains come up. Then we had the Jewish Chaplaincy Council arise. And so as religious diversification started to become more prominent in American culture and at hospitals, we started to see different chaplain denominations become more entrenched within their own creeds and within their own denominations. And what that the problem that raised for a lot of hospitals was that there was, again, a diversity on what a chaplain actually does day to day. If you had a Catholic chaplain, that would look radically different from a Jewish chaplain, that would look different from a Protestant chaplain. And that diversification meant that there was a lack of unity among what it is that a chaplain does. The third point here, rising spirituality in the healthcare movement. So the Joint Commission began to change the language around religion and focused more on spirituality. Now, spirituality, as many of us are familiar with, is much more expansive than the set religious distinctions. And again, that almost watered it down into what is it that a chaplain provides day to day. We started to see that physicians and nurses started to take it upon themselves to have a better understanding of spiritual care so that they could be the ones to provide it. So again, the role of a chaplain here is kind of floating around about where do they really stand within the organization or within a healthcare setting. We also started to see the rise of interfaith education and interfaith spiritual care departments. We then come to the fourth point with making healthcare whole, where the modern palliative care movement really contributed to this recent emphasis on taking care of the whole person and not just the diagnosis. So again, we're starting to see a lot more interdisciplinary groups take interest in spirituality, but the role of a chaplain is still kind of on the margins and on the fringes here. We're still trying to have a clear identity of how we can be a leading voice in what it means to offer holistic care, what it means to offer good quality spiritual care um, visits to patients and also to our staff. And so again, as we come into this present situation, we're still trying to ask ourselves, what is the role of a chaplain in an organization? And what is the role that a spiritual care department can provide as it tries to meet these organizational goals? One thing here I'll just quickly point on is Wendy Cadge also talks about how there are 3 different types of spiritual care departments. And she highlights um, something that's very fascinating to me in what makes a professional spiritual care department. A professional spiritual care department is well integrated into hospital protocols. They are seen as essential by the hospital. They're always present in some situations. They report to administration. They're funded by the hospital, and there's less reliance on volunteers, and they have a strong visibility across the organization. So that really is the gold standard of what spiritual care departments are looking to attain. We want to have that strong visibility. We want people to have a clear understanding of what our role and function is as chaplains within the institution. Transitional are departments that would like to become professional, but are coming out of the traditional department. So the traditional one, Wendy Ketch states that are the majority of spiritual care departments today. They're less integrated. They have a small interdisciplinary contract. They have a strong reliance on volunteers and students, and they have a fractured visibility. And that really stood out to me because what she meant by that is that the face of a department usually was relying on 1 or 2 chaplains who became very well integrated, for instance, maybe in the ICU or in the ED, where the staff were saying, hey, can we have chaplain so-and-so, and not saying, hey, we need spiritual care in this time. And what that meant is that the delivery of spiritual care was reliant on 1 or 2 chaplains and their interpretation of what spiritual care is, as opposed to having a consensus across the board within a department of what does good spiritual care look like. And so for right now, Hendrick Health is currently in this transitional mode. We're now starting to have greater visibility across our department, and we'll look at some of those examples in a little bit. Where we do currently within our demographics have chaplains who have been here for a long time, and we also have some new chaplains who are coming in. And so we are looking at the ways in which we can eventually get to this professional standing, where we have that strong visibility, where we have great relationships with administration, where we're seen as essential, and we're well integrated into the hospital protocols. I'll now turn over to Lindsay, and she's going to give some more overview on Hendrick Health and where we currently are as a department.
So we want to let you know more about where we're functioning. And Wes, you can go ahead and move all of the parts of the slide along. I actually just started my doctorate of ministry at ACU, and for anyone who's gone through the program, I just did my contextual assessment about Hendrick, so this is very fresh. So we'll tell you a little bit about where we're functioning, because that is clearly going to shape how we approach aligning our department with the goals of the medical center. I've experienced that firsthand. Coming here from the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a different culture, and how you approach the spiritual care and being a leader in spiritual care is different based on where you are. So I'm a little bit more about Hendrick. We are there are 3 campuses that we're licensed for about 600 beds, which doesn't include inpatient rehab, hospice, and home health. We serve nearly 30 counties around us. So it's very much a regional center, medical center. Right now we're level 3 trauma, and we're in the process to become level 2. And there's much more to it, but my basic understanding is we don't have a trauma surgeon on site 24/7. We currently only have someone on call, so that'll be one of the big shifts. And the specialty services we offer here are cardiovascular, neurosurgery, pediatric, NICU, and focusing on women's health and cancer services. So that's where we are now. And I'm going to talk to you now about the history of Hendrick. So Hendrick is affiliated with the Baptist General Convention of Texas. And we were founded in 1924 by a Baptist minister, the first Baptist minister of the First Baptist Church in Abilene. And what Pastor Miller Jenkins noticed is that at the time when Abilenians were seriously ill, they had to be transferred out to other medical centers really far away from their families. And he noted in a really holistic model ahead of his time, that people don't do as well in their healing process if they're apart from their communities. And so his dream was that there would be a medical center in Abilene that could provide a higher level of care so patients could be close to their families and to their loved ones. So that was accomplished in 1924. At the time, it was called the West Texas Baptist Sanitarium or Sanatorium. I think it's the latter. And of course, founding a hospital in 1924 was a hard time financially. So pretty much right off the bat, Hendrick encountered a lot of financial issues. And part of the Hendrick lore, every hospital and every community has its own sort of folklore that shapes the culture of the institution. One of the stories that's told when you go through new employee orientation and is very much part of like I said, the mythology of Hendrick is there's a story of Mr. Collier, who was the CEO at the time, got really innovative with payment because patients couldn't afford to pay for their services. So he had the idea of accepting basically goods and services like produce and livestock in exchange for medical care. And there's one specific story of a patient who paid for their medical care in black-eyed peas. And what happened after that is the CEO, nurses, staff from all levels sat on the steps of the hospital and shelved the black-eyed peas so that they could use them for food for the patients in the hospital, which I think is actually a really beautiful image that from its inception, Hendrick has been a hospital committed to working together in ministry as colleagues, that ministry is not reserved just for chaplains, that every person who works on staff is invited to participate in the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. And I say that specifically because that's the conclusion of our mission statement here. We're called Hendrick Hospital because in 1936, the Hendrick family in Abilene saved the hospital from bankruptcy. And since then, like I've said, we've expanded from one hospital in Abilene to two hospitals in Abilene and one hospital in Brownwood, which is, I believe, about 80-ish miles away from here. So more about our department, about mission and ministry. The first chaplain was hired in 1958, and that's significant to me. Many of you, I won't assume that all of us work in healthcare, but many of you know that about Joint Commission accreditation. And Joint Commission, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is the largest not-for-profit healthcare accreditation body in the United States. And they have standards that hospital and healthcare facilities like hospices and laboratories have to meet in order to be accredited. There weren't standards for spiritual care that needed to be met in the 1950s. In fact, it wasn't until the 1980s that there was a standard for that was added about a patient's right to access to support appropriate to their religious tradition. And it wasn't even until 2010, I remember that Joint Commission published a document called the Roadmap to Success. This will be included in our references. So I had already started my career. I had been a chaplain for 4 years, but that document was one of the first where Joint Commission said, there actually need to be spiritual care experts on your staff, not just people saying, do you need a priest? do you need someone to come visit you? But people who can do actual spiritual care assessments and are trained to do that. So that was in 2010. So going back, Hendrick has had a hospital that was hired by, or had a chaplain that was hired by the hospital for decades. And so that already tells you a little bit about the commitment that this hospital has to incorporating spiritual care into whole person care. And it also tells you about the history that Wes and I have inherited. Again, coming from my background, being a chaplain for the first 15 years in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was a different experience. There was less familiarity with chaplains and what we do. In our department, over the last 100 years, there have only been 4 department directors, so there's a lot of longevity. Wes is the 4th. In terms of the breakdown, too, some interesting things. Wes is the first director who's from outside the Baptist tradition. And in fact, all of the leaders in our department now are from outside the Baptist tradition. I'm Presbyterian myself. Our other two leaders are Methodist and Church of Christ. I was the first woman when I was hired here in 2022 to be hired into a leadership role. And now we have two female leaderships and in leadership and two men. So already there's a shift of it took a long time, but the hospital is shifting in how it is hiring and pursuing leaders. Also, for the very first time in our history, all of our leaders are board certified or board certification eligible. So that was not something that we had until recently, up until this year. Across our three campuses, we have 24/7 chaplain availability. The campuses vary based on the hours that chaplains are on site. And then when we think about our primary areas of ministry, we've broken them down into 5 different categories, where the first, of course, is direct spiritual care. So the interactions that we have with our patients, part of our daily process is we try and see every patient who's admitted into the hospital within 24 hours of admission to introduce the role of chaplains and our availability. Because while usually patients are introduced to the availability of chaplains when they're brought into the hospital, we found that patients appreciate a chaplain actually coming and explaining the role, because obviously we're the experts in understanding what we do. I think at our campus, we only have a 50% success rate in terms of trying to see all those patients, because there are quite a few. We also see every patient, at least I can speak for this campus, on their 4th day of admission who hasn't been seen by a chaplain yet, because that's the average length of stay at our North Campus. And we assume if you're still there after 4 days, you're probably dealing with a more acute situation, and then probably you might have more acute spiritual care needs. So that's a breakdown of sort of our daily tasks. On top of that, of course, our other ministry is to responding to those crises, traumas that come into the hospital, end of life care, things that you all are very familiar with. We also have a very integrated role in education, more so than I've noticed in my other institutions that I was a part of. We have graduate students from the local universities who do internships here. We have every other year we're offering a class for students at ACU, specifically students in the GST, to learn about hospital ministry. We also have a connection with our nursing school, where we at least once a semester will lead a workshop on what is spiritual care, what's the role of chaplains, and how do you preserve your own spiritual wellness as you're entering nursing. Church relations, pretty self-explanatory. That part of our role is we want, in an endeavor to not just build relationships collegially ourselves, in an endeavor to keep building relationships to help support our patients once they leave the hospital, because I describe hospital chaplaincy as a curb-to-curb ministry. We care for our patients when they're in our buildings, and after they leave, the boundary is very firm that we are no longer their chaplains once they leave the hospital, and they still have spiritual care needs. So over time, we're hoping to build like even more programmatic approaches with churches to how we support patients once they leave our walls. And then something that you would notice if you walked into our medical center, if you've never been here before, every weekday there is a devotional read by one of our chaplains broadcast over the hospital overhead. So through every building, even some of our outpatient buildings and our rehab, you'll hear a devotional every day. And that already tells you about the role of spirituality and the affiliation of the hospital. Every administrative meeting begins with prayer. Every safety huddle we have in the morning for all of the leaders in the organization ends with one of our chaplains praying. We have prayer services across our campus with varying regularity. So that is a much bigger component here for me than it's been in any other hospital I've worked in, and that's come with its own joys and challenges. So that's a breakdown, very quick summation. of who we are and what we're working with here.
So what Lindsay just provided with that overview was kind of what we do at a very base level. Just as a department, these are the areas that we're focused on. We do the end of life visits, we do the crisis intervention, we provide worship opportunities for guests and also for staff. And there is a strong history of having a pastoral care department here at Hendrick. But what I want to again remind us of is, now that we have that base, how do we now enter into the organizational culture from that base? So we have our baseline of who we are and what we want to do day to day, but then now how can we now partner with the organizational goals with their values, practices, and beliefs? And so that's what we're going to dive into now. So in summary, quickly, speaking their languages, integrating spiritual care into healthcare practices can significantly contribute to achieving key organizational goals. Chaplains play a vital role in supporting staff, improving patient outcomes, and enhancing the overall quality of care. And now what I'd like to go to is the actual organizational goals of Hendrick. So there are 6 strategic pillars of Hendrick. These are the goals that our executives and our administrators look at each day. They're always assessing how well our access is with our patients and our communities, where are we at with quality and safety, what are some areas that we can grow in and increase our capacity to, either do staff retention or bring in more patients, or reduce the number of transfers that we do to reduce out migration of patients. How are we engaging our staff and our patients in our community? How are we making the care that we delivered more seamless, where it doesn't seem so disjointed? And then how are we also improving operational efficiency? So these are the things that our organization are thinking about. This is their language, and this is the language that we want to be able to speak with them when we come to present our base. Now, what Lindsay presented, a lot of it was very much geared to chaplains. Like, there wasn't one thing that she presented I was like, oh yeah, like what is that about? Like, because I'm familiar with our own language, I'm familiar with how chaplains talk to each other, and we're familiar with the goals that we want to provide. I just know from personal experience that when I've tried to do what Lindsay just did with some executives, they kind of look at me like, that's nice, like that's cool, but how does that contribute to the actual goals of like quality and safety and engagement and growth and capacity and access and connected care and our operational efficiency? So we're actually going to go through each of these and show ways in which spiritual care departments and chaplains can speak their language within these areas, and also highlight some areas in which we're already doing that here at Hendrick Health.
Yeah.
And
I
so,
would add real quick,
yes.
Wes, that this is actually one of the standards and one of the competencies that you have to pass to go through the board certification process with BCC, the APC, the Association of Professional Chaplains. So I think that's another signal that this is recognized as an important competency for chaplains as they go through their own certification process.
So we'll go through each one here. And the definitions that I'm going to be providing for each strategic pillar is the actual language of admin and the executives. This is the language that they have come up with in how they understand quality and safety, or the other 5 that we'll go through. So the definition for quality and safety is: through innovation practices, we aim to ensure the utmost quality and safety, reflecting our sacred commitment to serve and uplift those entrusted to our care. So I'll turn it over to Lindsay here, and she's going to talk about quality and safety.
Yes. So on the left of your screen, we have 2 of the things that the organization really cares about. And I want to talk about the why. And then on the right side of your screen, I want to share how chaplains are meeting already and can support the organization to achieving those goals, especially the things that they're really worried about. So number 1, patients with fall risk. I was really inspired by, there is a webinar that's actually you can view for free on the Transforming Chaplaincy Network's YouTube channel. Again, that's included in the references at the end of this presentation. There's a presentation offered in 2021 by Mark Bradley, who's the manager of spiritual care and an ACPE educator at Northwestern Health or Northwestern Medicine. And he led this webinar telling the story about how he participated in an improvement leader training. And during that training, it came up that one of the hospital's safety goals was to decrease patient falls and make sure that they do preventative care for assessing patients who are at high risk of a fall. And of course, the reason the hospital cares about this is it's a safety measure. So in those conversations where he and other leaders were talking about what they can do to reduce fall risk, he talks about how he piped up and said, well, let the chaplains help you. And he recalls basically that when he said that, he got a lot of blank stares and a lot of questions about chaplains help us with fall risks. And I can just imagine their faces too. But he advocated as a leader in spiritual care to say we can utilize chaplains to support this and reduce falls. And so what he advocated for and what they ended up doing is they selected chaplains to meet with patients who were identified as high fall risk, and use motivational interviewing, which is an evidence-based skill and an evidence-based practice, to use motivational interviewing to discuss barriers for patients, risk factors for falls, practices, coping mechanism. And he knew that chaplains would be skilled at that because chaplains have specialized training in active listening. They have specialized training in identifying coping skills and coping barriers. And so he knew that chaplain skills would be applicable in that situation. And what ended up happening is he reported that there was a significant decrease in patient falls after chaplains started this program where they did motivational interviews with patients who are identified as high fall risk. And that just the hearing about that and hearing about its innovation was so helpful to me because it gave me a framework of like, what can I do? What quality goals, safety goals do I think are outside of the chaplain realm, but actually chaplains can use our skills to partner with the organization. We're not doing a study about fall risks here, but that for me is a framework that I'm carrying as I do my work and think about my goals for my campus. The other safety concern is workplace violence. This is well known to many of you, but the incidences of workplace violence or violence against healthcare workers since the pandemic have surged. There was a study done in 2022 that said that in 2019, the incidences of violence against healthcare workers was around 68%. And in 2021, it had already increased to 77%. And we're noticing here at Hendrick too, that is a reality of working in healthcare, is that being, especially in frontline work, our frontline workers are very vulnerable to incidences of workplace violence from patients and visitors and families. I'm actually on our workplace violence prevention committee now. As someone who can be a resource for thinking about how we care for our staff in the wake of those things. One of the discussions I had early on with that committee was they were going through some of the incidents that had happened in the hospital. And I noticed after they were talking about the protocol, things they could do better in the future to prevent it. I just asked, so how did we follow up with the staff member? What support was there after? And there just wasn't that wasn't their focus. But they were very open to hearing about my focus. So there was one small thing we did right off the bat, is we just included in the form that staff have to complete after experiencing workplace violence, just included a link where a checkbox, would you like to talk to a chaplain? Do you want someone to reach out to you to process what happened to you? So just that's a very small thing that we could do to let our staff know that we want to support you in the wake of stressful events, not just in the moment. The other thing that we're working on here is adopting a program called RISE. Some of you may be familiar with this program. It stands for Resilience in Stressful Events. It was actually, it's a program that was created at Johns Hopkins and in partnership with the Maryland Patient Safety Center. And what it is a peer support program. So there are volunteer frontline and administration workers in the hospital volunteer to be a peer supporter in the wake of critical incidents. So what the program offers is that out of this team of volunteers, if there's a critical event or an event of workplace violence in the hospital, there's a number they can call and they will reach a peer volunteer who's been specifically trained in how to provide support after a critical event. And they have the guarantee at Johns Hopkins, they will arrive within 30 minutes and they will provide on-site, hands-on support to whoever is seeking it. In 2020, at Johns Hopkins, they did a study to assess the return on investment of that program, specifically relating to nurse turnover. And they found that once RISE was implemented, nurse retention increased. There were less nurses leaving the hospital. And that saved the hospital money because it costs a lot to train new employees, and it impacted patient care too. Having nurses and physicians and clinicians who are on staff for a longer period of time, having less turnover impacts patient outcomes as well. So that is something we're hoping in the long term to work on here, in a way that we've educated administration about how chaplains can be colleagues in this goal. So I want to transition then to the next goal.
Growth and capacity. It's through responsible expansion, we strive to enhance our capabilities, elevate our service offerings, and ensure sustainable long-term impact for our community.
So what is the organization worried about when it comes to growth and capacity? We identified there are two issues that the organization is focusing on right now. Number one is burnout, and the second one is staff retention, which we talked about a little bit. In 2022, Joint Commission actually sent out an advisory that the recommendation that staff has programs to address healthcare burnout, because it's not rocket science to think about how the pandemic impacted healthcare burnout, the things that healthcare workers were experiencing. Then, of course, like I've already talked about, there's more incidences of violence against healthcare workers. And so Joint Commission said this is a problem and it needs to be part of the strategy of an institution to address that. And recently, in March of 2024, the CDC also wrote an article and offered an evidence-based practice for addressing healthcare worker burnout as well. And so this is again signaling that not just hospitals, but just the medical community on a whole are honing in to the impact of burnout and what it does not only to staff, but what it does to patients. In that vein, there is a study that was done in 2022 about burnout in nursing, specifically related to the consequences for individuals and patients. For individuals, one of the things they found is that there's increased poor general health for patients or healthcare workers who are experiencing high levels of burnout. They use a Maslow inventory for burnout to assess the burnout scores among staff members. There was higher turnover, there was lower job performance, and there was more higher incidences of nurses and healthcare workers who planned on leaving their institution. They also found that with higher burnout scores, there were increased med errors, there were increased infections, there were increased pressure ulcers, increased patient falls. So burnout is something that impacts organizations and it also impacts patients. So addressing that is important. And another study that was done that in 2023 specifically asked, they did a study amongst 21,000 physicians and nurses asking, assuming you experience burnout, what are the things that you think would be actually helpful for addressing that? What do you think could happen in your institution that would actually be helpful to supporting you and preventing burnout? And two of the things that ranked really highly in that survey that came back were providing resilience training and creating time and places for meditation and reflection. So already that signals a place that chaplains and spiritual care can plug in, because that's an area of our expertise, is creating spaces where people can reflect and meditate and guide people through an intentional practice of reflecting on what they're seeing. So Wes, I'm going to let you talk about the comfort cart.
Yeah, I'll quickly highlight that. So the Comfort Cart was an initiative that we started earlier this year. It's essentially just a cart that has hot teas, a selection of herbal tea, black tea. We also have different, goodies on there like healthcare snacks, and then also um, just ways in which we can offer comfort and support to staff. We usually round on the units and just say, "Hey, we're here just to bless you, just to say thank you for all that you do." It's an opportunity to engage our staff. It's a way just to say thank you. It's a way just to find out if there are any issues that are going on that they would like to talk about. It's more than just us going around and doing charity with our staff. It's a way just to connect with them, just to say, hey, we recognize what you do is very difficult. We all carry grief in different ways. Maybe you receive care by having a nice cup of tea, or maybe by having some snacks that we offer, or maybe it's just saying, you know what, I would just love a conversation to say that this day is not going so great, and I really appreciate that you came around. So these are just little soft engagements that we do with our staff. We also offer it after a crisis. The ED or the ICU can make a referral like, hey, we've had a very difficult week. We had a very complicated death. We would love for the Comfort Card just to come on around and just to engage our staff, just to say thank you. And again, just to offer that extra layer of care.
Mhm. And then I'll go through this quickly. We're doing grief recognition services multiple times throughout the year where we're targeting high acuity units that experience a higher amount of deaths, like our ED and our ICU, and leading services, brief services, where we read all the names of the patients who have passed away over the last however many months since our last grief recognition service. We do a blessing of their hands. And we also, oh, Wes, I think the slides went away. Okay. We also allow space and time where we lead a guided reflection on grief, and we offer education as well about how grief may manifest. So that's been something that we've gotten important feedback on. And again, meeting something we can show concretely is contributing to the goals of the institution. So Wes, I'll let you go next.
We'll get through these next ones quickly right
Yeah.
here. So we got access is number 3. Through outreach, community partnerships, and innovative solutions, we strive to promote a broad and complete healthcare landscape, leaving no one beyond the scope of our healing mission. And so the concerns of the organization in this one is, how do we integrate holistic care to our patients, to our staff, and to our community? And how do we increase the ease of access? And so a lot of the issues that administration has with as it relates to access is the fragmentation of care. Sometimes it's very hard to get connected with your physician, to get connected with the right person who can deliver your healthcare in a seamless way. And so organizations are looking at ways to streamline the healthcare process. But the ways in which we are tackling this, first internally, is to focus on spiritual wellness amongst our staff. And so building relationships with our nurses, building relationships with our physicians and social workers, and offering them education on how to promote spiritual wellness within their own discipline. And so one of the themes that we often bring up with our medical teams is this idea of sacred vocation. And it's a way just to promote meaning and purpose in their discipline, to know that what they do, yes, it's clinical, but it can also be seen as a ministry. And we have found that that also promotes just a sense of meaning, a sense of importance for the nurses and physicians when they go about and do their work. And so we'll also offer education on mindfulness. We'll also offer education on burnout strategies, on how to better cope with moral distress and second victim theory. And so through that process of offering better spiritual wellness, we want to create a medical ministry track. And so that's going to be a curriculum that we offer to medical teams, where they can go through a series of classes that focus on spiritual wellness, and then they will be designated as a ministry team that will eventually go out into the community and offer free screenings to local churches. And so that way, people in the community will be able to receive free screenings for things that they might not even be aware of, or even thought that I needed to go for a screening for. And so that's a way in which we can promote holistic care within the institution, to promote, again, just a sense of spiritual wellness, but then also to help with that ease of access from the community to the hospital by offering this free service for medical screenings. And so that's one way in which we want to just focus on the organizational concern around access. The next one here is connected care. And so the definition is our goal is to reduce fragmentation, effectively share data across care sites, and unify delivery to create a seamless, connected healthcare experience for our patients and providers. So the organizational concern for this one is, again, fragmented care and also growing technological capabilities. So what are the ways in which spiritual care can speak to this? So the one thing that we are working on here at Hendrick is something called a spiritual supermarket, and it's going to be a digital space that we will curate and deliver to not just to patients but also to staff. And the digital resource will basically be an app that you can open up where you can find daily devotionals and resources for wherever you are on that particular day. And so really we want to put spirituality into the hands of our patients and also our providers, where they can tap into a devotion that is related to what they are currently going through. So maybe they're going through burnout, maybe they're going through a period of complicated grief. Maybe they're struggling with a cancer diagnosis, or maybe they're in rehab for a long time. And so we want to provide just a diversity of devotionals, of meditations, guided prayers, opportunities to connect with local communities for worship. And through that, one, we're growing our technological capabilities, but we're also allowing patients to connect spiritually to what they are particularly going through. Chaplains can't see every single patient. We can't always get to all of the things that our patients and our staff are struggling with. But if we can provide a centered place where they can turn into and tap into and access meaningful spiritual resources, we believe that we can then ease that fragmentation of care that often happens with our patients and our staff. And we called it a spiritual supermarket. The vision is as if you were going to a supermarket to pick out your own fresh vegetables and fruit. We will curate fresh and healthy devotionals that you can pick and choose yourself. And when you just look at theories around spirituality, a lot of it is down to how you want to engage your own meaning and purpose in your life. And so we want to acknowledge that and provide that for our patients and also our staff. We're hoping to launch that in July of next year. Lindsay will speak here on operational efficiencies. And so the definition is our goals are to ensure excellent stewardship through efficient use of space, equipment, and resources to provide the necessary infrastructure for efficiency and future growth.
Okay. So there are two focuses right now in our medical center, but also across many medical centers. If you are in the healthcare setting, I'm sure you've heard talk about this too. And that is reduction in readmission rates and reduction in length of stay. Some of you may know in terms of readmission rates, I think it was in 2012, Medicare said that they would be issuing a penalty for hospitals when a patient is readmitted within 30 days of their prior admission. And I believe it's anywhere between 1% or 3% of their reimbursement to the hospital is docked. So there is a financial penalty now if a patient is readmitted within 30 days. And of course, it's not good for a patient to have to go through that as well. Being in the hospital is hard, and being in the hospital takes its own recovery. So it's reducing those goals and reducing that and making sure that we can prevent patients from having to go through that is a goal of the hospital. At our hospital, and I think across other medical centers too, whenever a patient is admitted for the first time, so any patient who's admitted is given something called a LACE score, and that stands for length of stay, acuity of admission, patient comorbidities, and ED visits in the last 6 months. If a patient's LACE score is between 9 and 16, they're identified as being at high risk of readmission. So this is where, again, I was informed by Mark Bradley's study about fall risks, and seeing that was an organizational goal, I got curious and thought, I wonder what chaplains can do. I wonder if chaplains can be a part of that, because one of the risk factors for readmission, there are many like comorbidities, polypharmacy, but one of the risk factors is low social support and social isolation. And that is something that I see that chaplains can plug into specifically because we're well trained at doing spiritual care assessments. We're well trained at assessing what helps people cope and where they get their support. So as soon as I talked to our leadership about that, they said, yes, please do something. So I'm a part of the readmission prevention committee now. Right now, I've just started and I don't have any conclusive data to offer. It's really, right now, it's all really raw. What I've noticed over collecting data for 3 months now is that when a patient is readmitted into the hospital, I will go back and see if they were seen by a chaplain. And right now it's tracking that only 20% of the patients who are readmitted within 30 days were seen by a chaplain on their previous visit. 80% were not. And then in our average, well, I'll skip over that in terms of our how many patients we see on a daily basis. So right now, it seems that a small number of patients who were readmitted were seen by a chaplain. So what I'm hoping is what I've started doing is I'm started prioritizing when a patient does get readmitted or has a LACE score between 9 and 16, we prioritize seeing those patients every day. We don't know what the outcome is going to be yet, but we're hoping that doing that will show a decrease in readmission rates overall. And then we're not focusing right now in our institution on length of stay. But that is always an institutional goal, reducing the length of stay, not just because of the financial burden to the hospital, but also because patient outcomes are worse. If they stay in the hospital longer, a lot of times because they're at higher risk for hospital acquired infection. It takes recovering to get when you're out of the hospital. Being in the hospital is not always is hard, to say the least. So studies have already been done that we're not replicating that chaplain involvement, for example, in the ICU in general reduces the length of stay of patients in the ICU. So those are two ways, just by example of how one of them we're really actively plugging into here and how chaplains are plugging into other places in the country. So
So
Wes.
yep, just our last one here on engagement. This is probably the most broadly defined one, but it is we strive to be a beacon of health, faith, and support while engaging with and contributing to the well-being of the broader communities we serve. This is probably the one I think chaplaincy kind of falls neatly into. And so it relates to patient experience and also cultivating a culture of mission and purpose for our employees and providers. And so we've already kind of touched on a lot of these things already with the previous 5 goals. But 2 things that really come up for our department is we've started a chaplaincy fellowship program where we have quarterly education meetings where we teach our chaplains on the ways in which they can be more sensitive and aware to patient experience. And so one of the things that me and Lindsay will be looking at in the future is also looking at patient satisfaction scores. Currently, I don't think there is anything related to chaplaincy and patient satisfaction scores, but it is something that we would be interested in finding out more so that we can then provide better education for our chaplains. And then again, to have that awareness of what does it mean to offer excellent customer service or excellent hospitality as it relates to the patient experience. And then really the ultimate goal for this entire department is to be integrated and included. If we were to summarize all of 6 of these goals and just the journey that our department is on, it is to find ways to be more integrated within the organization, within particular clinical units, and also within our community so that we can also be included in various committees, strategic planning, organizational vision that they have for the next couple of years, and then also included with community initiatives. And that's a way in which we can better provide more holistic care. And so that leads just to this final conclusion and takeaway. The key takeaways is that we want to ultimately get to a place where we offer holistic care for all, not just for the individual patient that we're taking care of, but how do we holistically take care of our system and our community. Lindsay did an excellent job of just offering the measurable impact. There is a lot of data that is coming out coming out right now that speaks to the ways in which chaplains significantly improve key metrics for organizations. So having just the awareness that these conversations are now beginning to grow more significantly and looking at the ways where you can align where you are currently placed, I think you'll be you'll begin to see the ways in which spiritual care has a direct role to helping with organizational goals. For fostering organizational resilience is a key strategy for spiritual care. We talked about the comfort cart, grief recognition, the different educational opportunities that we offer to our nurses. Again, finding ways where we can build this overall organizational resiliency to whatever may be coming across the organization's table, showing that spiritual care has a role and a voice in that area. And again, integrating spiritual care across the entire organization and system. We're very excited to see the ways in which we're going to continue to grow. I think our organization has been very pleased by the ways in which we've taken the initiative to hear what they care about, as opposed to saying, hey, this is what we do. Let's flip the conversation and say, hey, we want to know more about what you do, and we'll come alongside and partner with you. And so we've already seen some pretty cool results from that, and we're just excited for where the next phase goes into. So